My guest today is Serra Kiziltan. Serra is founder and head of product design at Serra K. She's been in the US for 20 years, and in addition to growing up in the UK and winning a scholarship to study architecture at Yale under Zaha Hadid, if you know, you know, she has lived and worked in New York, Shanghai, and Tokyo, working in design leadership roles in global digital media agencies such as Frog, Huge, and Critical Mass for Fortune 50 clients, including Meta, PwC, and AT&T. I'm excited to talk to Serra today because, well, all of that. There's lots to unpack in there, lots of lessons and experiences, I'm sure, and there's more. So without further ado, let's get straight into it. Hi, Serra. Welcome to Always an Expat.
Hi, Richard. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's such a pleasure to come on. And it's, to your point about like the title of this, Always an Expat, it is something that I truly feel as well. So I'm excited to kind of dig in a little bit more deeper and get into the conversation and kind of give you some more context to
Great.
my
Well,
background.
thank
Yeah,
you.
my
Well,
thoughts.
as I think expat stories are great stories. I am an
For
expat. I speak to
sure.
expats all day, every day. I think they are underexplored. I think they're underappreciated, and I'm excited
Definitely.
to have this opportunity to share them with a wider audience. So, on that note, tell us your story. Tell me how you ended up here, chatting to me.
Yeah. It's funny. I'm a strong believer in not just kind of going with your gut and seeing where the journey takes you. And I think that with that philosophy in mind, it's really that's just kind of how my journey has really panned out. Initially, what had happened was I was in undergrad for architecture. I had started off my career thinking I definitely want to do something in graphic design or in architecture. And I had a lot of energy and I thought I'd apply it to architecture because it just seemed like there was a lot to kind of dig into there and a wealth of education that I could get. And it was the path that I took. I wasn't sure even at the beginning if I was going to do it for the rest of my life. But I knew at the time it felt right. Had a great education at University College London. And then when I finished my undergrad, I had to take a year out of practical training. So I had a wide array of friends in New York. And I was actually in New York during 9/11. And I think that again just solidified this desire to really take advantage and seize the day and just kind of go with that and run with that. And so I started off doing internships in architecture, and I was only supposed to be in New York for 9 months and go back. But I really, from the moment that I arrived in New York, I honestly really felt at home. And not just because of the friends network that I had, but also just the culture, the ways of working, the ways of approaching work, and kind of again, in that context with entrepreneurship as well, just kind of this real get up and go.
Hmm.
That seemed to align really well with me. And I realized that in London, there was something there that I couldn't put my finger on. Like something just didn't really feel like a fit for me. So I
Were you
did,
born and bred London?
I was actually born in Istanbul, but I moved to London when I was less than a year old.
Okay.
Um, I think things were very different back then too, in the UK. The I guess there was a sense of probably a lot of growth happening in diversity, inclusion, and just kind of really feeling a sense of connection there. That's what I was really looking for. And I really felt that I found it in the States. And with that desire in mind and desire to kind of explore that more in mind, I just ended up doing one internship, a second internship. My boss for one of the internships was head of admissions at Yale, and he encouraged me to apply. I really hadn't given it much thought before that, but he thought I'd be a really good fit. Did that, and then ended up doing architecture afterwards, going and working in some great firms like Grimshaw. Worked on big projects, infrastructural projects. But what had happened was, as I got more senior, I just really felt that for me, I was getting more involved in some of the more administrative aspects and less involved and in the weeds with the creative aspect of the work. And so for me, the fulfilling part comes with the balance of the two. And with Zaha and that kind of previous legacy, kind of skill set in mind, I really felt that I wanted to apply that in a different way. One of the things about architecture, obviously, is the fact that you don't get a lot of feedback from people who are actually using it. You're satisfying the needs of the client. And for me, it was just what I was doing when I first went into architecture was designing for the people. Like I wanted to enhance, make people's lives better. And so that led me down the product design path and, working on some great projects and great people and great companies. And I think through that, I've just felt really fulfilled and have continued to feel that way. And so, here I am, several years later, still doing what I do and taking that knowledge and applying it to my own consultancy.
When you say you arrived in New York and it just felt right in a
Yeah.
way that London hadn't, despite having, I assumed at that point, lived in London for 20 years.
Yeah.
Now we're a few years past that, and you look back. Can you put your finger on what that was? What was missing in London?
I think the way we connect with people as British people, you know, as a culture is much more different. It takes time to get to know someone and kind of really invest in those friendships to kind of really build a strong connection with people. Whereas I felt that in the US, maybe it's because of more of the fact that, it is an immigrant culture and people have come from so many different backgrounds and people really embrace that, like, oh, I'm half Italian or I'm a quarter Portuguese or, whatever that might
And
be.
1/37th like
Yeah,
Bulgarian
Native
or something.
American,
Like, really? Yeah.
And I think to me that really resonated. I'm sure we're going to go into a lot more detail about identity, and I think that it seemed like people were going through the same thing where I was kind of trying to figure out what my identity was coming from different cultures, and I think that kind of felt really that really kind of impacted me and just felt that people shared the same kind of challenges with figuring out who they are and maybe not even knowing, and it doesn't really matter. So yeah, I think that and just the way in which you can network and connect with people is really easy, and very quickly build up really solid relationships.
Before those relationships with Americans or with
Yes,
expats?
with Americans. I actually didn't come across a lot of expats in the beginning. My circle was mainly, kind of Americans at the time.
Yeah, the reason I ask is because I speak to a lot of expats all day, every day, and we have a lot of these kind of conversations. And I think it's very different arriving somewhere like New York than it
Yeah.
is elsewhere in the country. Because my first port of call was San Francisco and then New York, and
Yeah.
I had a similar kind of assimilation that you did. Because I think a lot of the people in New York, especially Manhattan, have come from all over the country and elsewhere. But I speak to other expats who've gone to other places, and they say to me, "Oh, it's really hard to break into American circles here because they've got these circles that they formed at school or college, and
Yeah.
it's very hard to break into them." And that hasn't really been my experience. Maybe more so now. I'm actually in
Interesting.
Greenwich, but moving into New York, I was kind of like you. It's just like it's almost like an embrace. Everyone's there. It's a very thrusting city. Right, it really
Yes.
is. I remember
And
being
that,
in Hoboken, looking back, or
yes.
Weehawken, looking back at the city, speaking to someone who lived there, and you're right in the water, looking back at the city, and he said when everyone disgorges on a Friday night, you sit on this veranda having a drink, and the city's almost pulsating as it like everyone just leaves. And
Yeah.
obviously, it's not, but New York has that vibe to it.
Yeah, it definitely does. I would say from my own personal experience, it's been interesting because I have a real passion for, I guess, figuring out how people tick, and how to kind of find those assimilations or like connections between people. So I've had a lot of people when I've traveled from different cities just being really curious. I mean, maybe because I look a little, out of place for sure with like tattoos and, a shaved head on one side or whatever. And people are just like, who is this person? But yeah, I found it much more easier personally to connect with people here than I have done, in my past with through my own experience in England.
So tell us, you've been here 20 years, give or take.
Yes, coming up on my 20th
How
year.
how did you get here, and how did you navigate actually? Because coming, I mean, I think it was a different 20 years ago, although it was the thing that made it a lot harder was 9/11. I'm interested to hear where you were and what you were doing and how that went down. That's I mean, everyone remembers where they were, but how did you actually get to the US? And
I really encourage people to apply for or take a look at a national interest waiver, because it's a great pathway and it's a much more fast track pathway to getting a green card. And you can self petition or you can petition through work. And I just did it through work.
wait, so you can be on a H-1B,
Yeah.
and if you qualify for this, which you think more people might than they realize,
Yes,
you can self petition, so you don't have to be sponsored by your
exactly.
H-1B employer. You mean you can be, but
Exactly.
you don't have to be.
Yeah.
Oh wow, that's massive.
Yeah. It's really great. And all you have to do is I got reference letters. So I got about, I mean, you only need to submit three or four, but I did my rounds and I was really focused on it. And it was like, I am going to get these reference letters. And the ones that have more weight are the ones where people don't know you, but they're essentially assessing
Hmm.
your resume
Hmm.
and your background to validate that you are someone that meets those standards and
Hmm.
requirements for the visa.
Super interesting. And when was that?
That was in 2015 is when I got, so 2014 is when I started preparing that. And then I got my green card in 3 months because you
Oh, but
skip
wait.
one and two and then go straight to the third part of the process.
So when did you first move here?
I moved here in 2002.
2000, so 2002, 2014, 15, and are you still on a green card?
No, I'm a US citizen.
You're a US citizen. Okay, right. So you've had a long relationship with
Immigration.
USCIS, right? Yeah,
Yes,
you've
yes,
and
definitely.
how was that?
It's a weird feeling. I
Hmm.
think for me, and this comes down to identity, I think as well. It's really just I wanted to close the chapter. I had spent so many years going through immigration that I wanted to burn all of my paperwork at the end of it. I was
Yeah,
just like, I'm
yeah.
done.
Get it.
Um,
Totally get it.
and I think it was more to do with that than it was to do with nationhood or feeling that I was that was part, like being an American was part of my identity. It's an odd feeling, I guess, to have because you are taking on a different country's citizenship. But for me, even though I'd been here all this time, I still very much felt British. And
Mm.
that's the primary identity that I feel like I kind of identify with. So taking that oath was a very difficult moment for me in pledging allegiance, and going through that process. So yeah, I think that that's basically why I went through that process. But the strange part of it is I love the culture. I would never see myself living anywhere else. But I think that last step in feeling American, I don't feel American. I still very much feel British.
Yeah,
And perhaps
I
that's
agree with you.
something that other expats feel as well. But yeah,
Yeah, for me with the whole immigration thing, there's a you don't even realize it, but there's almost a permanent sense of insecurity. I think I felt
yeah,
prior to getting my citizenship, and then there was just a relief. It's not about being American or British, although I tend to agree with you. It was just like I felt a sense. I felt a burden had been lifted. I felt
yes,
a sense of security that I didn't have previously. And it's something that I don't think anyone who hasn't been through this can relate to. So,
yeah,
obviously immigration is a hot topic right now, and I think it's very telling that most pro-immigration people are, a lot of them, not all obviously, but a lot of them, I suspect most immigrants are pro-immigration for obvious reasons, but also we have an appreciation for the emotional toll that it can
yes,
take.
it
Not
really
to
does.
mention, yeah, not to mention all the benefits immigrants bring. That let's not go down that.
Yeah,
Just from an individual emotional burden perspective, I there was a real before and after for me.
yeah, definitely. And I think that having a green card, there are still restrictions, and you don't feel completely free of them. So I think just closing out this long chapter and just feeling like, okay, I've accomplished this. And I
Yeah,
think in the last 2 years before I went through it, I knew I wanted to become an American citizen.
yeah.
But again, it's the part of it that's to do with nationhood or identifying with being an American is it's not I don't feel like it's a strong part of my identity.
You said a minute ago though you don't think you'll ever leave. Do you mean
That's
you
right.
think you'll live here forever?
Yes, I still feel a connection back to the UK, so I feel like I would still want to have some kind of degree of grounding there. So whether it be having a place over there that, I can kind of go to, I would love that. But I think still kind of culturally and where I feel kind of comfortable is here in the States. But it's taken a long time to get there to figure that one out.
Forever's also a big word.
It
I've
is,
worked
yeah.
with I've worked with many an expat who, when I first started working with them, the it was never going back, and then
Yeah.
people change, situations change, relationships change, and I've seen people do a complete U-turn
Yeah,
and end
definitely.
up back in the UK. It's interesting. It's fascinating. The life of an expat is inherently changeable. Like
It is.
I
And
don't
the
think you can
sense
ever
of
say
nation
forever.
and the sense of nationhood is changing as well, right? Like identity is constantly changing. And not only from your own perspective as on a personal perspective, but also on a country perspective as well.
Okay, so America, 20 years,
Yeah.
immigration journey. Any surprises that immediately, good or bad, that immediately spring to mind?
I think one of the hardest things with going to an English speaking country is the fact that before you actually embed yourself in another country that speaks English, there are strong cultural nuances that are there that perhaps you hadn't thought about before you moved over there.
100%.
So
100%.
in some ways, mentally, it's easier to adapt to a country where it speaks a different language because you know that there is that differentiator there in your mind,
Yeah, yeah.
and you can easily separate it into, okay, this is a completely different culture as well. But that was one of the biggest hurdles, I think. And when I go back to the UK now, I don't know, the way in which people work is so different. The culture of working is different. And it's not that I'm like forceful or anything, but I think the get up and go attitude of being in the States, or particularly being in New York, is not conducive to a British working environment. So I
Yeah.
think that that's something that I noticed. But again, it's because I just feel such a synergy with being out here in the States, and the way they think about things. I appreciate that they say what they think,
Mm.
because I'm exactly that type of person as well. And I think that being in the UK, maybe one of the reasons why it was tougher for me is that it's a lot more about reading between the lines. And people in England, I don't want to generalize, but the people I came across is always just kind of a little bit more guarded and reticent to kind of talk more openly about things that maybe they find challenging, or maybe to do with your interpersonal relationships with them, or maybe something that you've said. That was more difficult for me, and I'm kind of much more of a direct person, and I treat everyone the same way equally.
Have you seen it's doing the rounds, there's like a PDF or some sort of visual, and it's what the Brits say,
Yeah, I've seen
what the
that.
rest of the word hears, and what they
Yeah,
mean, and it's
exactly.
really funny.
It's
And it's
true.
bang on a lot of it. Yeah, it's bang on, and it's really funny. But it must be really confusing if you're
Yeah,
not a Brit and you're hearing something else. What you said a minute ago, I was smiling there because about moving here and English speaking. I often say the fact that America is they speak English, and the fact that we feel like we know it from movies and TV programs, it
yeah,
creates a completely false sense of expectations when you arrive here. You think
yeah,
America's going to be one thing, and you view it through your prism, or as a Brit, it's going to be like Britain, and it's not. They
yeah,
have their own values. They have their own way of doing things. Their language is different, or can be different, and at first you can really butt into that,
yeah,
and you're going to break. America's not going to change because
yeah.
Richard Taylor lands here and expects something to be one way and it's another way. And it took a while, actually. I'm ashamed to admit it, but it's once I kind of relaxed into that and kind of stopped expecting America to be what I expected America to be through what I'd grown up. It got so much, it got exponentially better for me. And if I could go back and give myself some advice, it would be preconceived notions, expectations, drop them, go in with an open mind, and work with the system rather than
Yeah.
getting bitter and complaining about it. There's a
Because it
lot
can
of
give
that.
you a lot of anxiety, right? You're coming in, it's always like, it was like this for me. It's like, what are they thinking? What do they mean? Like,
Mm,
how do they view me? Or how do, did something I say sound wrong? Or, are they genuinely interested in me? Or is it like, are they not? And they're just being friendly? And I think that was hard for me to overcome and let go, just like you said, and be like, it's okay, don't worry about that, and just enjoy the moment, enjoy your interactions with people, and don't think too much about it.
mm, mm. If you could go back and do anything differently, is there anything that stands out?
If I had to do things differently, I think that I probably would have wanted to spend less time worrying about career and more time focusing on enjoying the moments. Time is just so fleeting. And I think
Mm,
that what I have felt is that in my 20s, particularly, I was just so focused about going one level, like up leveling all the time, that I didn't get a chance to fully appreciate those early moments of just being much more, exploring a lot more, and kind of really embracing that a lot more about being in the States, and kind of really taking advantage of it. In my 30s, I got better at it, but I think in my 20s, I was just so focused on, just getting ahead. What's the next thing that's going to make me much more attractive to an employer, or help me up level in my profession. So I think I should have just let that go and be more comfortable and more relaxed about it.
I've dreamed my life away, Sarah. I've spent my 20s and early 30s planning, projecting, never present.
Yeah,
And I've lived
exactly.
Manchester, I've lived in Dubai, I've lived in San Francisco, I've lived in New York. I had a great time, and I was never present for any of it.
Yeah,
Never enjoyed any win. It's really quite sad when I look back. Now
yeah,
I've got young kids, and I'm really trying to, and it's hard
yeah,
with young kids, and I'm trying to be present because I know that you only get one shot at this, and I'll look
yeah,
back. It's hard that though. I think that's a natural. So in my experience, the reason I love expats so much is because they're adventurous people who do bold stuff. Adventurous people who do bold stuff tend to be quite ambitious. Ambitious people tend to be planners and projectors, and I think living in the moment is hard
yeah,
for them, for
yeah,
us. Um, so I don't think that's unique to you, but it's a skill, absolutely.
for sure. It's definitely a skill. And I think once I got to that pivot point in my career where I switched from architecture into product design, it was really just about the sense that I was being much more aware about the present and enjoying the present, and working crazy hours and just being exhausted all the time, not feeling that I was getting out of my career what I really wanted and the enjoyment out of it. Like I'd got to that pinnacle point where I'm like, I've done all of this stuff, but where has it really landed for me? Like, where has it gotten me? And that's the moment where I was like, there is more to life than this. Being able to have a good balance. And even when me and my husband bought our own house, it was like, we just want simple things. We want a front yard, we want a backyard, we want to be able to step outside and be able to take a breath and, walk around, do simple things, go hiking, go walking. We have motorbikes, so just getting on a bike and enjoying the journey. That's where I think I've kind of shifted. And I think that New York has a tendency for people to get very focused
Definitely. Yeah.
on work, on careers,
Mhm.
and at a certain point, your body can't hack it anymore. The
Mhm.
physical
Mhm.
toll it takes on you is incredible, and you really have to stop in a moment. And New York doesn't really allow you to stop and take a
Mm.
pause. But I think you just got to be really disciplined and find it for yourself.
I sometimes will a picture will pop up on my phone.
Yeah,
We're walking the dogs out in Central Park, which is just Central Park before 9 a.m. Dogs off a leash, two dogs to
yeah,
every human. It's the best place on the planet. But when I look back, sometimes I still see pictures, and I don't look healthy.
yeah, yeah,
I mean, I had no kids, so with my wife and I were enjoying a lot of what New York has to offer. But I don't look like a healthy chap. I look like I'm tired and worn out, and um, indulging too much, perhaps.
yes, yes. New York is about networking. It's about, you know, um, drinking and eating with people, and a
Yeah,
lot of living there revolves around that. It can be a good thing or it can be a bad thing.
yeah, yeah,
And I'm sure for you also now being like a little bit separated from New York, like have a little bit of distance. When you go back in, you realize how intense it is and how
yeah,
you're much more appreciative of being able to have that distance from it.
yeah. I don't go in very often, but when I do go in, I do get a buzz. I went in on Friday for my anniversary with my wife,
Yeah.
and
Happy
we went
anniversary.
and thank you. Went to Gramercy Tavern for a couple of drinks, but we're vegetarians, so we couldn't eat much there. We went to a fantastic vegan restaurant around the corner. But there is a buzz, and when you arrive in Grand Central and you go into the main hall, I feel like a tourist again. I'm looking around, looking at the
Yeah,
roof. I
yeah.
do love it. I really do love it, and there is a buzz to New York that I really miss. I don't miss city tax though. I really,
No,
I
no.
don't do it. I really
I'm,
got fed up with city tax.
yeah, I mean, the triple taxation is hard on your paycheck for sure.
Yeah,
But I mean, like, I agree with you. It's great to go in and, have a meal, be able to kind of enjoy and be kind of, you know, embedded in that
Yeah.
environment. I think what we've noticed is like you go to a restaurant and all of a sudden you're like, I'm paying like
Right.
45 bucks for a steak and
Right.
you know, steak frite. And then a bottle of wine costs like 80 bucks that you want to get,
Yep.
and it just adds up. And for me, especially working in a hybrid work situation, when I was working in like agencies, it was my pulse rate would definitely go up. You come into the station, you're learning again how to, you know, dodge people,
Yeah.
and
That whole thing on the street is real. And
yeah,
the muscle memory comes right back, and you're
it
weaving and you're
does.
darting. Yeah, no, I was very conscious of that. And I tell you, do you know the food court underneath Grand Central where the trains
Yes.
come in? Uh, this wasn't this trip I'd been in. This is the trip before. I wanted to get a bottle of water, and they wanted to charge me $6.50 for a bottle of Poland
Yeah.
Spring, and I was just like, no. Obviously, I can afford it, but I was like, I'm just not doing it. I'm just not
On
letting you take
principle. Yeah.
advantage of me, right? I
Yeah.
will walk all the way around and pay $2.50 for a cardboard box of water that I know they sell around there.
Yeah.
It was just like, no, I'm not. Yeah. I won't. It'll bug me for 24 hours if I pay $6.50 for a bottle of Poland Spring on from you right now.
Oh yeah. And I had an incident where I remember, and I think this will resonate with a lot of expats, is I bought a beer and it was supposed to be a pint of beer and it came up like almost like a half pint. And out of principle, I just had to go back and I was like, this is not a pint of beer. And they're like, yeah, it is. And I'm like, no, 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 no. I know what a pint of beer looks like, and I'm not like I can't accept this. So
Yeah,
those
gotta
moments
stand your
definitely
ground.
do happen. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's a matter
Is
of
there anything?
principle
Is there anything
more
you
than
really
anything.
miss about the UK? Anything that you look back on? Anything that really?
Yeah, I think when I was in school, you know, in London, I didn't really take advantage of what London had to offer me. I was, and I think this is to do with an architectural education too. It's like, you know, you are sleeping in school. Like everything, your entire world revolves around, you know, your studies and your education. And I wish I could have taken advantage of that more than I did. I think maybe if I'd gone to school outside of the city, I would have had a higher appreciation for coming back to London and doing more things that I love doing, like going to art galleries or exploring the city and you know, discovering new parts of it. And I think part of it just is that when you live in the city or any city, you kind of still stick to certain pockets of the city. Like you don't tend to go off and, you know, be like, oh, I've really not spent any time in Staten Island and I would love to go see it. Like that just doesn't really occur
Said
to
no
you.
one ever.
I know, yeah, that's true. That's true. But maybe let me put it in a different way where if you lived in Brooklyn, maybe you never experienced Bushwick because you lived in
Yeah, yeah.
Dumbo, that kind of stuff, where I still feel like we're very much localized in the
Oh,
areas that we
totally.
feel
Yeah.
comfortable in. And, you know, cities have so much to offer. And I think that that's one of the things that I really feel that I should have done more of. But I think the same goes in New York City as well. Like, I was once wanting to do like a sightseeing tour because I was just curious about what do they say about New York when they're describing it to tourists. But I think anything to do with tourists, whether you're in London or New York or anywhere else that's like a major city, you never want to do it because first it's overpriced, and again out of principle you don't want to do it, but like the other thing is why would you do a tourist thing, you know? But again, I think it's just a process, a different way of experiencing the city that I think we should consider sometimes to see it through the lens of other people.
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. Anything else about anything? So that's kind of looking back on your childhood or your schooling and then wishing you'd done something differently. But is there anything like today that you yearn for, or you miss, or you look forward to when you're going back and you're excited to do something or
Yeah.
see something?
Yeah, I really enjoy the museums in London. I really also miss the heritage. Like that's something that is
Yeah,
such a strong part of the
yeah,
identity. There's so many parts of it and pockets of it that I miss, like being in the countryside in the UK. Just parts of it that haven't changed much,
yeah. I love
and
that.
and
Yeah,
are still kind of long standing. I love that about it, and just the conviction that people have about being British and just feeling really strongly. And I think that that's part of the reason why I just love going back, and I fall in love with it all over again. But I definitely feel more of a tourist.
so you do love going back. So let's. How do you feel when you go back?
When I do go back, I meet up with my friends. Everyone's life has changed a lot. Obviously, everyone's had kids, and they're on a different path. But the parts of it that feel London is very, changes a lot, and I think that there are parts of it that seem very familiar and parts of it that don't. And again, it's like a cultural shift as well, where you have to kind of readjust back to being in the UK. There's this funny moment where a kind of an anecdote where I arrived in London and I'm a big coffee drinker, and the flights back to like the UK are always like really early in the morning
Mm-hmm.
or really
Yeah, yeah,
late at
yeah.
night. And I remember getting off the plane and I just needed a coffee. I had taken the evening flight and it was like 8 a.m. and I was
Yeah,
trying to get
I
back
know
into
it.
that cycle. So I went to a Costa that was there at Heathrow, and I wanted an iced latte, which sounds really pretentious, but it's just what I felt like at the time. And you know, the I think in America we're kind of a little spoilt because they're always so accommodating.
Mm.
If things aren't on the menu, they'll still do it for you. And in Europe, it's different. It's like that's what's on the menu. Can't, that's just how it is. And I think, they were like, we don't do iced lattes. And I was like, well, can you do a latte? And you
Just
guys
stick
have
some
ice,
ice.
right?
Yeah. Well,
And and
you can never be certain in Europe, right? If they do have ice or not, but they should have had ice.
they no, they did. And I
Yeah.
said, so I can pay for the cup of ice. I don't mind, with the latte. And they're like, sorry, we can't do that.
Oh my God,
And I and
no. What?
and that was just one of those moments where I was like,
Oh, really?
I probably would have accepted that when I was in the UK, that it's just that's kind of the way it is. But I had been so accustomed to being spoiled that I just couldn't understand it. Like it just didn't make any sense to me.
It doesn't make any sense. It's like the famous sketch. Computer says no. Just
Yeah,
what is it? Yeah, the
we,
sketch show where the computer
yeah,
says
yeah.
no, just for no
They
reason.
were,
Just
yeah.
classic,
They were
classic.
like, well, we can do a frappe, and I was like, I don't want
Yeah,
a frappe,
yeah.
And for a while, even I remember going back and iced coffee hadn't been a thing. And so that was you could find a cappuccino in like even in a greasy spoon, but if you just asked for a coffee, you would be hard pressed to be able to find
Yeah.
one. So again, just differences of how things operate that you come
How,
across that you don't realize.
how do you feel though? So you're now an American in America,
Yeah.
but you still feel like a Brit.
Yes.
When you go back to Britain though, how do you feel, identity wise?
Um, I feel more British, I think, being in America. And sorry, my
Yeah,
whole sunlight is coming into my face, but I feel more British coming into America than I do when I'm there for some reason, if that makes
yeah.
any
No,
sense.
no, I completely identify, agree, understand where you're going from with
Yeah,
that.
yeah. It's a really strange phenomena, and but I still very much feel British. It just feels sometimes that I'm a tourist in my own country when I go
Yeah,
back.
yeah.
So
This is the weird thing. This is one of the reasons why we're called always an expat, because you're an expat in the US. You'll always be an expat to the US. You'll always have expatriated from another country,
yeah,
from the UK. You'll always be an expat. But then when you go back to the UK, the longer you are here, or just outside the UK, when you go back, you're almost an expat there now. It has
yeah,
moved on. People have moved on. The country has moved on. Everything has
yeah,
changed, and you've changed but gone in a different direction than you would have done if you'd been in the UK. You're always an expat everywhere you are. My
yeah,
my closest friends here are expats, and I think that, I think that's common for a lot of people, expats, and I think that's because there is this kind of added and shared dimension.
yeah,
That
definitely.
Yeah, it's really interesting to me. It's really interesting to me. But it can also be quite lonely. Not quite lonely, but it can be a bit disorientating. I think I might have just butchered that word. A bit disorienting.
Yeah,
When you go home and it no longer feels like home.
yeah. No, it is a very weird feeling, but it's not it's something that I feel very familiar with because being Turkish, I have never felt Turkish, but I speak the language fluently. And when you speak the language fluently, people just assume that you understand everything about the culture, and I don't. So it's it's harder in a way for people to be more forgiving because they don't hear an accent. And if they heard an accent, then they probably would have been like,
Oh
"Oh, well,
right, yeah.
obviously she's foreign." But I don't know
So
anything about. Yeah, go
that's
ahead.
super interesting. So you speak Turkish fluently without
Yeah,
a foreign accent, so people expect you to understand all the nuances and localisms and colloquialisms of Turkish
yeah.
life and culture, and you don't, and then they're less forgiving because of it, or
Oh
less
God. Yes.
understanding.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh wow,
Definitely.
yeah, that's a dimension I'd never even considered.
So yeah, I think that there are there is a certain amount of unlock that happens with cultures when you get to speak the language, which is why I've always been so fascinated with languages because certain things are just difficult to convey in a different language. But I also feel that if you haven't lived somewhere, even if you speak the language fluently, there are you're never going to be fully embedded.
Yeah,
Like you have to watch the TV series. Just like how we connect over things like Little Britain, a
yeah.
computer
Little
says
Britain,
no.
thank you. Yes, thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's it. Yeah,
those are kind of important moments of bonding with people and a shared
yeah,
experience,
yeah.
which I don't have in Turkey, and I haven't gone back in 20 years. I haven't had a calling to my parents to go back and forth, but I just haven't. There are other places that I would want to go to, and it's just I'm sure it's very, very like it's probably changed a lot since I was last there, but it's not been a calling for me.
So, Sarah, I read on your website you speak 5 languages. Five, is
Yeah,
that right?
yeah,
So,
yeah.
obviously, English, Turkish. What are the other three?
The other three are French, German, and Japanese. So, granted, with Japanese, I did it for like a year and a half, and I came back, did a little bit more, but now I'm going back to it again because there is a lot that I've kind of forgotten. I can still like have conversations and dialogues with people, but Japanese is a very complicated language. There's always things to learn. Different alphabets. They have three different alphabets. And then one of them is based on Chinese, so it's character based.
They have three
And
different alphabets, did you just say?
yes, they do.
Three.
They
Oh
have,
my
yeah,
God. That's.
katakana, which is mainly used for foreign words, and also colloquial kind of language that's developed. And there's hiragana, which is the one that you get taught as your kind of your core alphabet. And then there's kanji, and kanji is based on Chinese characters. So the meaning of the character changes depending on what it's next to, like the other, like how it is in the context of a word. So kanji usually, like, you for a for there is a certain amount that you know and you get taught at school. If you want to go beyond that, then that's, it's kind of down to you how deep you want to kind of get into that. But yeah, it's a really interesting language. But then I'm really fascinated by languages. My mum is a linguist and she
Oh,
speaks seven
really?
different languages.
Wow.
So she got me into languages at a very young age. And you know, migratory paths of languages are really fascinating.
Mm.
So like Finnish and Turkish and Urdu share the same language roots because it was
Oh,
part of a
really? Finnish,
pathway.
Turkish, and Urdu. Oh,
Yeah,
wow. Wow. Okay, they're
yeah.
very different places.
Some of them, it was part of the same migratory path, and some people
Right.
went north, some people
Yeah.
stayed in the middle, and some people went south.
I learned recently that Romanian is the closest to Old Latin. That
Yeah,
so the ancient Romans, they might be able to understand each other. Yeah, it's the closest to ancient Rome. I've got a bit of interest in that period of time, and I learned recently that's the closest to ancient Rome, that Old Latin.
yeah.
I thought that was very interesting. We've just got I was terrible at languages, and it's like something I want to fix, but we've just got my eldest, we got him into FASNY, the French American School of New York, and one of the main drivers is if we get him in young enough, he's likely to be bilingual, and I just think it's so important. I just think it's such a huge thing you can give a
Advantage,
kid.
yeah.
Yeah.
It really helps expand upon your understanding of the world. I think even in product design, like, I really encourage designers to talk to other designers from different countries. I was actually talking to the head of interaction design yesterday, and we were talking about nuances in user experience. So, for instance, if you look at a website that's Chinese or Japanese, it's very copy heavy and it seems, it's overwhelming in
Mm,
terms of how do you navigate this? It's
mm,
like on a page, there's probably triple the amount of content that you would get on an English website or an
really?
English speaking website. And again, that's just down to how people consume information.
Hmm.
And, I've had instances where clients have been like, oh, just take the English website and just translate it. And I've been like, no, that's
Yeah.
not how it works.
Yeah.
That isn't going to work at all.
So, Sarah, this is a podcast about being an expat with a
Yeah.
natural focus on being an expat to the US.
Yeah.
So, I wanted to ask you about the American dream, which in my
Yeah.
experience means something radically different to a lot of people and gets some people rather exercised. So,
Yeah.
with that in mind, what does the American dream mean to you?
Um, I think what the American dream really means to me is the fact that it's a meritocracy. And I think that, it's one of those situations where if you want to do something, there is always a way to do it and you can achieve it. The fact that I've pivoted in my career so late in my career and still feel like I've been able to accomplish so much, I don't think, and my husband being German as well, like we kind of look back on it and feel like, I don't think that could have really happened in Europe.
Mm,
There is this sense of just feeling as though if you have a mission, you can do it. You just have to figure out what that path is for you.
mm, yeah. What does your American dream look like?
My American dream would really be retiring at 50, if I
50.
could. I would love to do that. Me and my husband have talked about it a lot. And, when you retire at a regular age, like 65 or 70, you just don't get to really experience as much as you probably would if you retired earlier. Not to say that it's going to happen by any means, but it's just kind of a dream of ours to be able to do that. Again, it just comes down to, I think, what I wanted earlier, what I thought of the American dream has shifted and changed a lot. And I think I would have said something that would be more weighted towards my career.
Hmm.
But now I feel like it's more attuned to just getting to take advantage of experiencing life and making the most of it and maximizing it and putting less emphasis on the work side of things to be able to help get to that, feel like I'm that's part of my American dream.
Well, American dream is something that means something very different for almost everyone I speak to. And something else that means something different to a lot of people is retirement. So you said you want to retire at 50, but
It's a
what
dream.
does that mean? What would, if let's say you're 50 now and you're retiring, it's all happening. What would that look like for you?
Retiring at 50, I think, would mean for me being able to travel a lot more.
Mm,
Just having this desire to constantly be in new environments and new places. That's a strong desire. We've talked about that, me and my husband as well. He's not had a chance to travel much because he had to wait for his green card for 5 years because it took them so long to process it. So he is dying and itching to get out of the country. And I think for us, it would be a lot of that, would be a lot of traveling, going to, taking advantage of the proximity, of different countries to us that are accessible to us. So Central America, South America. I would love to do a motorcycle ride from the tip of South America all the way down to the bottom. But there may be challenges there because my husband is a morning person. He likes to keep a schedule, and I'm kind of more of a go with the flow person.
mm-hmm,
So
mm-hmm.
that'll be a real test of marriage right there. But yeah, I think that really it's about I don't know, like doing like I'm my friend is an oyster farmer, and I would love to kind of take on something that's like a new profession and be able to, really kind of explore what I'm capable of. It's the reason why I learned how to ride a motorcycle at 40 years old too,
Oh,
because I
really?
it was frightening, terrifying, and but I learned so much about what I can accomplish and what I'm capable of. And when you get on a bike, what's great is it's not about the destination, it's about the journey. And you get so much more you're so much more connected to your environment and so much more aware of a world that's beyond your little bubble.
Mm.
And it gives me a strong appreciation for that. So I hope that answers your question, but it's just I think again just comes back down to just enjoying the moment and making the most of what the world has to offer.
I'll be honest, Sarah. I don't even say we only call retirement now because it's a term people are familiar with. We actually talk about what next.
Yeah,
And you're very much at 50 years old. I know it's a goal, but or a dream, but you're very much talking about what next, not
yeah,
that stereotypical vision of retirement that people have, which no one has anymore, where you just put your feet up and don't do anything.
yeah. I
That
think
doesn't
it's
happen anymore.
I think it's a generational thing too. The world has opened up to us so much more
Yeah, yeah.
um, through
We have higher
technology.
expectations. We have higher expectations now as well, which is a good thing,
Yeah,
but it also can be a challenge because higher expectations often cost a lot of money as well.
they do.
Have you seen Around the World? No, The Long Way Round.
Yes, I have.
It's so
I
good, isn't
love
it?
that show. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Um, that's something that I dream of doing as
yeah.
well.
I can
But
see how
yeah,
that would. I watched that many years ago when I was in college, but I can absolutely see how that inspired many future motorcycle trips, massive motorcycle trips. It was what a fabulous program and experience and adventure that was.
yeah. I would love to get into that. But also along the lines of being terrified, like I appreciate that people might be terrified of moving to the States or being in the States. It's a big move. But I
Mm.
also believe that taking risks is so important, not worrying about whether you're going to succeed or not, but just, you know, seeing what's out there. Like moving to Tokyo for a year for me was just like, oh my God, like I'm in a foreign environment. Someone connected me through Friendster to one of their
No way.
friends. That's how long
Wow.
ago it was. And I was, I booked my ticket for the next day after I got all my stuff sorted out, like my internships. And I was like, what am I doing? I'm going to meet someone who I have no connection to personally, a country where I don't speak the language, and I have no idea where that's going to take me. And it was one of the most eye-opening experiences of my life. I learned a lot about not only just simple things like the culture, but some of the things that I kind of remember really vividly is how your mind gets to, knows how to navigate situations, like navigate your way out of a train station or navigate to a location where there may not be a map because on maps they don't always put down streets because the city grid is constantly changing because the land is more valuable than the buildings that sit on it.
Hmm.
So usually your points of navigation are banks or train
Hmm.
stations.
Right. Okay.
But it's just more like a matter of survival, right? And your mind just works in mysterious ways and finds ways of helping to guide you. And that was something that was just really great
Mm.
to learn about myself.
Mm. Yeah, and so that's why I love working with expats. That's why I think expat stories are great stories because just a lot of people just would never have that experience and don't know what that's like, and that's
Yeah,
why I hope we
yeah.
can start to elevate these stories. So on that note, if anyone wants to find you, where can they find you, Sarah?
Sure, they can find me on LinkedIn.
Hmm.
I'm always, I love to connect with people and get to hear about their stories too. And love to hear about their journey in terms of how they've gotten to where they've gotten to. If they have any questions, helping them navigate those as well through my own experience. And then also on my website, which is www.serra-k.com.
Yeah, there's a great graphic on there about your movements in the
Yeah,
years, different
that's true.
cities. So yeah, everyone should check that out. Great. Well, thank you so much for being a guest on Always an Expat.
Thank you for having me. It was such a pleasure being on the show. It's also given me a lot of insight into some of the parts of my journey and helped me figure out what it is that I may want to do coming up into the future. So, yeah, thank you.
Very cool. Very cool. Thank you.